again and welcome back to the Leeds Hacks election special. Here are some more tweets that have just come in. Liam Jackson 90 says, enjoying Leeds Hacks updates. C. Engwell says, fantastic show and lovely take on tonight's proceedings. Love the live music and wide-ranging coverage from Leeds. And Jack Igor Milne says, interesting to see exit polls suggesting such drastic differences to opinions such as YouGov, praying they're wrong. Jack also says, whilst he respects the BBC, I'm finding Leeds Hacks general election coverage much less tacky than Jeremy Vine appearing on Downing Street in a virtual set. Thanks for that, Jack. This hour we'll be focusing on how the media have covered the run-up to this year's election. Here is our reporter Aimee Robertson to tell us more.
This year's general election has been one of the most interesting so far, with the news stories being reported by the media every day. Now that the election night is upon us, it's time to take a look at how the media have reported this year's general election run-up. Firstly, let's take a look at how the radio have reported this year's election. I headed to the BBC to find out more.
You want to talk about the election? Here at the BBC, impartiality is an absolute necessity. It's a must, it's a cornerstone for pretty much everything the BBC is about as a public service broadcaster. We have to be impartial, and we're often accused of political bias from both sides, and it's absolute nonsense. I'm going to be up all night covering it, reporting through the night into BBC Radio Leeds, then into the breakfast programme the next morning. When everything's packed away, I can go and get maybe 2 hours sleep, I think, and then I'm back to cover the local elections, which are really important for our listeners as well. So the BBC's coverage has all been about keeping it clear, making it clear, keeping it simple, so breaking down the political speak and the jargon, cutting through all that and making it as easy to understand for the viewers and listeners as possible. But on top of that, really checking the facts, because you know what politicians are like, for either making the facts fit their argument or plucking figures seemingly out of the air. So we've got a dedicated fact check team. I think that Labour could well take the seat in Pudsey, which is held by a very good Conservative MP called Stuart Andrew, very good constituency MP.
But for the print media, their coverage can be a different reporting game.
The thing about newspapers is, in terms of the news coverage of events and what the politicians are saying, you have to be fair and balanced. But newspapers aren't like broadcast. Broadcast is governed by Ofcom rules, which mean you have to be impartial and give equal coverage, and especially during election campaigns. But newspapers can declare for one party or the other. So, for example, today, The Sun in Scotland has come out for the SNP because they know it's popular, I'm guessing. The Yorkshire Post can declare for one party or the other, as far as I know it hasn't yet, but could do in the next few days if it wanted to, or doesn't have to. But so newspapers have slightly different rules. That's what you call a free press. What we have is a website online, and that's becoming more and more important for newspapers now that it's a digital future. So the online staff will be working on the website throughout the night, updating as it goes, and I'll be, as digital reporter at the Leeds Arena, interviewing whoever will talk to me, filming whatever's happening and getting that on the website as soon as possible. I think generally though, maybe we'll be doing this all again in October. I mean, everyone's expecting there will be a hung parliament and there'll be some deal, but you know, it could well be that it is just so tight and it's so chaotic that despite it being in law now that elections are every 5 years, we may have to do it all again in October.
For more general election coverage, head over to Leeds Hacks Online. I'm Aimee Robinson, Leeds Hacks News.
Welcome back again, our political expert Elliot Ryder, journalist Robyn Vinter and strategist Tanya Harris. Elliot, can you please talk us through today's headlines?
Well, first up we have the Tory supporting Daily Telegraph. This paper has supported the Tory party from as far back as 1945. They've gone with the headline, "Don't do something that you'll regret." This is referring to Tory supporters that potentially have supported UKIP in this year's election. However, judging by today's polls, it would seem as though these supporters have reverted back to supporting the Tory party. Next up, we have the Labour supporting Daily Mirror. They've gone with the headline, "Send and Packing," obviously with a picture of George Osborne and David Cameron. It's pretty self-explanatory front page. Next up, we have the Lib Dem and Conservative Coalition supporting I newspaper. They've gone with a much less partisan front page in comparison with some other publications today. And finally, we have the Lib Dem and Labour supporting newspaper The Guardian. This has gone with the headline, "It couldn't be closer." However, judging by tonight's polls, it most certainly could be a lot closer.
So Robyn and Tanya, what are your thoughts on the various stances of the newspapers?
Well, I think the first, kind of the most striking thing, I think, of this election is that the Independent, kind of everyone was thinking it was very kind of, slightly left-leaning newspaper, and they've come out in support of another coalition between Lib Dems and the Tories, and that happened, yesterday or the day before, I think. So it kind of came as a surprise to almost everyone, and even quite a lot of the staff as well at the Independent. So so I think that was kind of the thing that stands out to me as kind of the biggest the biggest surprise.
I think even though they've announced their support for Conservative Lib Dem coalition, their coverage has been a lot more impartial than some of the other coverage we've seen. I think it was yesterday, there's quite a lot of quite controversial front pages from the likes of like The Sun and the Daily Mail, quite right-leaning papers. Stuff about like Ed Miliband eating a bacon sandwich that we've seen already. It felt like kind of very low blows this close to the election, and in some cases it seemed almost desperate. It could have been it could actually have the opposite effect of people thinking maybe they've gone a bit too harsh and actually generate support in the opposite direction than what they were intending.
Yeah, I think that's something we don't really know at this point. You know, in the past, papers have claimed to have swung elections.
Like The Sun, what won it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just don't think this time, you know, we're in that situation. It would be interesting to see, you know, what voters really do think.
I think it might not make any difference either, because if you're buying the Daily Mail, then your support is more likely to be for the Conservatives.
Yeah,
so
it's no mystery, is it?
So a headline like Vote Conservatives, we don't know that that's had much effect because the people who support them will already be buying that paper. But like you said, it's something that we can't really know until we see who's won.
However, it would seem that the Sun newspaper is most definitely the kingmaker in an election, as it hasn't lost an election since 1979.
Yeah, it's a very populist party. They like to hedge their bets, and they do.
Yeah.
They're the most popular daily newspaper, so I think they do have a lot of weight with voters.
But also, since then, they have gone behind the paywall online, so they're not influential online, you know, anywhere near as much as a lot of the other newspapers. So, you know, that's another thing. People are calling this like the online election, social media election.
They've missed out on
they've missed
a
out.
lot of influence.
Yeah, they did launch Sun Nation, which was kind of their own election site, but it didn't have kind of the same kind of leverage as the likes of kind of the Mirror, the Guardian, obviously, and you know the Daily Mail, which is a huge online newspaper.
Right. Well, now various politicians running for Parliament in the general election attending a hustings event at our very own Leeds Beckett University. Our reporter Nassr Adris found out more about their thoughts on minimum wage.
The party has the highest proportion of women serving in braingates in the country.
I ran a business for 20 years in graphic design and in Apple Mac systems.
Then we came along and were being restricted again.
I grew up in Jamaica.
I was a bit of a nerd and I liked reading the papers and current affairs and things.
Do you think that the Labour Party's commitment to increase the minimum wage to £8 by 2020 is really ambitious enough?
No, it's pretty pathetic actually, but you've got to combine that with our ambition to see more and more people on the living wage and to use the idea of the living wage with public-private contracts. So when the public sector's asking a private sector organisation to do a contract for it, as many local authorities do and government bodies do, one of the conditions must be that you pay a living wage. And obviously that's higher than nothing.
Minimum wage, I think, to be fair to the last government, one of the best things that they did was the minimum wage, and I think it is right. And I'm glad that his Chancellor's increased that over this Parliament. I think the other thing to look at as well is not just about increasing the minimum wage, because it's right that we say to businesses, we're cutting your taxes. Instead of giving us your taxes, we therefore expect you to pay people. That's why when we increase the minimum wage, that's how we would expect it to happen.
If you remember, when the minimum wage came in, it was the minimum living wage. Inflation has now taken that to where we are today. Very quickly, the living wage is going to become the minimum wage. And as long as we have a situation whereby employers are not valuing the work and the work that then people are doing, you're going to have this situation reoccur again and again.
So the Liberal Democrats make big claims about raising the starting rate of tax, but all academic studies show that most of the benefit goes to the highest earners.
Does it? Well, do you know what? I'm not really bothered about what academics. What I'm bothered about is people who are on the lower echelons thinking, do you know what? I've got more money in my pocket, and if somebody who's earning 60 grand has actually got a little bit more money as well, so what?
Okay, so you don't mind it's not really a very efficient way of helping people on lower income.
Well,
Sorry, go on.
Okay.
The Green Party, as I said, believes in a living wage of £10 an hour. Seattle in the States has introduced a living wage of $15 an hour, which is roughly £10 an hour. Believe it or not, that means that people who work in cafes and restaurants can actually afford to eat in the cafe and restaurant they work in. And that improves the economy. The whole economy improves, and it's worked. You know, Seattle's done it, other places can do it. It works. I'll leave it there.
Still with us this evening, our wonderful guests, Elliot, Robyn and Tanya. So guys, do you have any idea about what parties are proposing to do in terms of minimum wage or zero-hour contracts?
Well, I know that the Greens have said that they want to raise minimum wage to £10 across the board. Labour have gone with a similar stance but have gone a lot lower for gradual rise in minimum wage to £8. And I think the Conservatives have been a lot more focused on what that could mean for smaller businesses, the sudden rise in minimum wage, so they want to raise it a lot slower than the other parties do. I'm definitely in support for a rise in minimum wage. I think it's not a living wage, it leaves a lot of people struggling. But I do think we have to consider, especially a jump to £10, what that could mean for smaller businesses whose largest expense is the wages they pay their workers.
Well, this ties in very well with zero-hours contracts. A lot of parties have been arguing that these zero-hour contracts are quite bad and a lot of people shouldn't be signed onto them. However, there was a woman on Question Time the other night who said she enjoyed the flexibility of a zero-hours contract. As it's been in Labour's manifesto, they've said anybody who's been on a zero-hours contract for more than 3 months, they then have the option to be signed on for the full amount of time. So I was just wondering how that could affect people and minimum wage in certain cases.
I think the reason the issue has come like so much to the fore at the moment is just the sheer number of people that it involves. So it's kind of no surprise that it is a big issue at the election. There's more people than ever on zero-hours contracts, more people than ever on minimum wage. So you can understand how it's become a huge issue. I think we haven't heard enough from people on minimum wage, and like you say, we've heard the occasional thing about zero-hours contracts, but we've been getting all the rhetoric from the politicians, but it would be really good to hear a bit more from people actually on minimum wage.
Definitely heard a lot more from people on zero-hour contracts than on minimum wage, and there is a lot more people living on minimum wage and struggling with the rising cost of living than there are people on zero-hour contracts. And I think, although I do agree with Ed Miliband that there should be the option after a set amount of time to get those set hours, I do think the more important issue here is people who are getting paid less than they can actually live on. I think they might have also tried to address that in other areas like the housing, trying to cap rises in private rent prices, because these are all adding up to a rising cost of living that on minimum wage you just cannot afford.
Yeah, it's a really big issue at the moment.
It's definitely one that I think will swing a lot of votes.
Yeah.
And now we are heading over to our team at the Leeds Direct Arena, who have some footage of the count.
Right, so George Moody out there running, has that increased your chance of getting to lead these positions?
Well, George Moody has served our community for 40 years, firstly as a councillor and then as the leader of Leeds City Council, and then as our MP from 1992 to 2015. And George is immensely respected throughout East Leeds and throughout the city, and I'm proud to have George's support. George is a tough act to follow, but I believe that people who live in East Leeds not only respect George, but also they are fundamentally Labour people, and they know that Labour is the party that is on their side.
So with him being out of the running, has that made it a lot easier for you, or how do you feel?
Well, George took the decision to retire. Everyone deserves a retirement. and he deserves retirement more than most because he served our community so diligently, has worked so hard for ordinary people in East Leeds and across Leeds. He decided to retire. We had a very competitive selection process to choose a candidate to take over from him, and I was really pleased to win the backing of the Labour Party members here in East Leeds.
Let's get a quick reaction from you for the exit polls with Conservatives being turned away from majority.
Well, I hope that's not true. The reason that I hope it's not true is because I want to save the NHS from privatisation. If we get a Conservative government, then they'll finish the process they've started of turning our NHS into an American-style healthcare system where they feel for your wallet before they feel for your pulse. So I think it's vital, in the interest of the NHS and in the interests of ordinary people, the length and breadth of Britain and here in East Leeds, that those exit polls aren't true.
Okay, how much competition do you think UKIP and the Greens pose to your seat?
I think that people in East Leeds, when I've been going around speaking to thousands of people at street stalls, door knocking, canvassing, on the telephone, at public meetings, I think people in East Leeds know that it's only a Labour government and only a Labour MP that will stand up for them and their interests. So I'm confident that Labour will win in East Leeds, and I believe from the campaigning we've done that we will win well in East Leeds. And I want to thank the people of East Leeds for that.
So how optimistic are you for a Labour government?
Well, I think it will be very close votes. I think every vote will count. I'm hopeful we'll have a Labour government, but I think it's because I believe we need Labour governments in order to abolish the bedroom tax, which affects 1,499 homes in East Leeds, in order to abolish exploitative zero-hour contracts, which have become more and more prevalent in East Leeds and across the country, in order to increase the minimum wage, in order to abolish employment tribunal fees, which have priced working-class people out of access to justice, and in order to create a better society, a society running in the interests of the 99%, not the privileged 1% at the top. But we shall see at the end of the night or early in the morning what the actual result is.
What do you think the consequences of a Conservative government will be?
I think the consequences of a Conservative government will be more cuts, will be more privatisation, will be more ordinary people being made to pay the price for a crisis that they didn't cause, a crisis that the bankers caused. Because the banking crisis was caused by the bankers, the clue's in the name. The banking crisis was caused by the bankers. It wasn't caused by people here in Leeds who are unemployed. It wasn't caused by immigrants. It wasn't caused by people working in low-paid jobs. So I think the consequences of a Conservative government are bad for all of us.
Thanks for tuning in once again, and remember to keep them tweets coming in at Leeds Hacks.